which brings us to our election coming up. What is a Christian's role, both in the church and out in the world when it comes to politics?
Get out the vote.
What is that, Dr. Scarborough, what does that look like? Christians in the world, in the church, but politically active. What does that look like?
Well, in the final analysis, what Christians have got to do is begin to vote like followers of Jesus, not as Republicans or Democrats. You know, all the talk we've had tonight are leaves on the tree. A book I'd recommend everybody in this room read is called America Alone by Mark Stein. He's a well-educated Brit who got fed up with socialism, moved to America, and now he sees the same thing happening here. He sits in for Rush Limbaugh quite often, and probably the only person I've ever heard fill that microphone that does as good or better job in that role. But we right now are the only thing keeping darkness from literally covering the entire planet. But the current regime that's in power is in the process of overwhelming the system. We are not on the brink of bankruptcy. We're already there. We have debt now piled upon the American system that cannot be repaid unless there's a real blessing of God restored to the country so that economic growth becomes possible. If you read Deuteronomy chapter 28, you get God's formula for blessings and curses. If you read Isaiah chapter 3 through 5, you will see exactly where America is. Isaiah 3 documents the 9 successive things that happens to a country that turns its back on God. And by the way, the very first thing that God removes is the prophet and the judge. And let me just illustrate, right? So much of what Brad has observed is the absence of real judges, men of integrity interpreting the law. We've now got people who are inflecting their own ideology into the law and mandating it upon the American people. But they're able to do that because there's no prophetic voices in the pulpit. We have a lot of pastors who enjoy being pastors because they're affirmed for that. They're there at the bedside of the hurting. They're there at times of bereavement. They're there to encourage, to rescue a family, and all of that is part of the pastoral role. But the other side of that is the prophetic side. 5 years ago, you couldn't turn on television without hearing the booming prophetic voice of Jerry Falwell, D. James Kennedy, Adrian Rogers. These were men of different faith backgrounds, but they were preaching consistently what sin was, telling the culture what was right, what is wrong. Today, the men who occupy the biggest pulpits are preaching this message: I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, they're okay, and it's okay. And the church is drinking. We have the itching ears that send the checks in and buy the books because we want to hear that. What the church, the true church voting looks like is men and women going to the polls and not voting on personalities, but in taking the time to investigate what these men and women actually believe and rebuking those who are no longer carrying forth an agenda that glorifies God. And you don't have to use that terminology, obviously, but if they're voting to bankrupt the system, if they're voting, we've got a Democratic-controlled Senate that hasn't passed a budget now in over 3 years. 3 years. You can't run a nation, a household, or a business like that. When they run out of money, they simply print more money, which means the hard-earned dollars that working people have earned is becoming less and less valuable. Look at what you pay for gasoline. Look at what you pay for milk and bread and staples. And while some of us can generate more income and buy what we need, there's a whole segment of society in our country that's out of money. So they become natural pawns lining up to get the freebies from the politicians who'll promise anything to give them what they have to live. So we've got, while there's still time, we've got to find principled men and women and vote and support them, vote them into office, then hold them accountable by attending these meetings and by removing those who don't abide by the Constitution. I don't know if God's going to give us a chance to change this thing, to turn it around. Isaiah 3, that documents the 9 things of a nation in decline, includes the verse that says, the day will come when one man will turn to his brother of his household and say, you run for that office, you let this run be under your hand. And the response is, I don't want to get involved. Apathy is the chief sin of the church today. 50% of those who go to our churches aren't even registered to vote. Of the 50% who are registered to vote, half of them won't show up on election day because they'd rather be watching TV or they get busy doing other things. And of the 25% who could vote, a good half of them will vote their pocketbook or by the way somebody looks rather than what they actually will do.
Yes.
Therefore, the remnant, the light, the salt, has been withdrawn from the culture, and darkness is now seeking to destroy this once free and prosperous nation. We need to do two things. We need to pray like we have never prayed. Vision America is in the process of calling for a 40-day prayer vigil to begin on September 28th and end with the polls closed in Hawaii. Christians across this country who know the Lord need to pray and fast and beg God for mercy for one more chance. Then we get off our knees and we take those who share our values and we vote in mass for the candidate that best reflects the values that we hold, including fiscal policy that says, yes, we will pay our bills. And if we have a chance at all, it's right now. We may have already so sinned away our day of grace that darkness is the natural result. And then judgment comes, we'll find out who the real Christians are because they're the ones that will stand until they die. But if we have a chance, this is our chance. And now's the time, unlike any time in my lifetime, and I'm older right now than I've ever been. Now's the time for the church to be the church. Darkness shines the brightest. Light shines the brightest when it's the darkest. And it's time now for the church to be the church.
Dr. That's outstanding. And one thing that I find that it just incenses me as a Christian is when I see our faith being manipulated by our most highest leaders. And I just simply cannot, I'm in the process, just as a tremor, I'm in the process. My wife has come to Christ recently, and I'm just blessed, that she's on board with that. And that's God's grace. But by doing so, it's forced me to really get down into my theology and into my biblical understanding without just babbling like a monkey, and not having any idea what I'm talking about. So she has come to me with some very interesting questions, which I would not pose to you necessarily, but how do we wrap our brains around this when we see, those that are claiming their Catholic faith, such as Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, look the American public in the eye and say, a woman's right to choose. Now, I'm not going to argue one way or the other. I simply don't know how they can, in good conscience, square that with their faith as it relates to, for example, the health care law.
Well, that's where the prophetic voice comes.
Right.
That's where it's up to the preacher to declare prophetically. And thank God that Catholic Cardinal Dolan now is standing.
He's on fire.
We can't find evangelicals that are standing as clear prophetically right now as Catholic leadership is. But it's time now for the true people of faith, regardless of their faith tags, to stand up prophetically and address these kind of things. The left doesn't hesitate to use name calling, call us liars or call us bigots. It's now time to call them what they are. And when someone says that the President of the United States recently used Jesus to underscore his new value that he's just discovered after 6,000 years of civilization, that man has a right to use the rectum of another man as the object of his sex life and call it good and natural. We've got to call that what it is. It is sodomy that God forbids and condemns the nation that embraces. And if the church is silent, we deserve to fall on our face and die. Our founding fathers shed their blood for truth. We've got to again stand on truth. And if some are offended, if some leave the church, so be it. But it's time now for us to stand on biblical truth and nothing else.
one of the passages says, "For the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that Christ died for all." And I will say this, people say, well, how involved should a church be? And the real determiner is it really truly filled with the love of Christ? If a church is truly filled with the love of Christ, they're going to care about people outside their walls. And if they truly care about people outside their walls, they're going to manifest that concern and that caring by going to the polls and voting.
That's right.
So we have I also see, to dovetail what you said, in some degree, a heart and a love crisis. And I'm hopeful, the little silver lining that I personally am looking at with economic doom and gloom on the horizon that I see so many people talking about, is that it's often in times of economic disaster and crises that we have the greatest opportunity for humility and change of lives and hearts in our country. And so if that scenario does play out in the months or years, I only hope that the church and the pastors will look upon it as an incredible opportunity. That's the silver lining among that big thunderhead with the tornadoes coming down in Texas. Okay? But that's the silver lining. That I think we should also remember that in times of great travesty and hardship and even amidst resulting from sin, can come times historically in our nation for great times for repentance and changing the ways. We had the Roaring '20s. Following that, we had the Great Depression. Right after the Revolutionary War, the lowest church attendance in U.S. history. Following that, we had the Second Great Awakening in the early 1800s. So.
Yeah, I was hoping to make a couple of points. For me, and Frank, sometimes this helps, is that like with the American ideal, a lot of times with the Christian ideal, and a lot of times with the Muslim issue, they bring out the Crusades. I said the Crusades were people, individuals, not the ideal. That's not what God wanted. With America, I look at the America founding, the idea, what all of us grew up with, freedom and liberty, the idea of not having the government on our back. That's what we're fighting for, not the corruption that our government has caused on both sides. So it's that ideal of freedom. And what we're fighting for is that what our founding fathers envisioned. And have we gotten there? No, on many levels we have not. But it's that ideal that we believe in, that I believe in, is that freedom and liberty and our blazing our own trail, like when they won the West. That's what I fight for all the time. And one thing that really emboldens me is that at what point in history will each one of us be able to be, I call it Founding Father 2.0. We're going to fight for what our Founding Fathers fought for. Man, what an opportunity. This is great. I'm having more fun than I've ever had in my life because the difference between light and darkness, good and evil, black and white, have never been clear. When was the last time we got to fight against people who openly call themselves communists? You know? It's like, you're going to openly say that? Okay, I'm going to be a big spotlight and shine on you. And that's, and that's fun for me. I look at what Abraham said, I'm going to mess this up as far as my biblical background. That was my dad's thing. But as far as knowing the exact scripture, but he said, what was he kept negotiating with God about, was it Sodom and Gomorrah, about finding the righteous man. Yeah, find five. And I pray every day, God, make me one of those righteous men. And all of us should be doing that because that almost makes this a game. It's like, bring the burdens on. You talked about tribulation. I kind of hope it's post-trib so I can sit there and fight the fight. Let me fight through that because that gives us an opportunity to stand before God and try it. And every day and every opportunity, in every conversation, I tell folks, I live my days as though God's looking over one shoulder, my wife's looking over the other. Keeps you honest. But also helps you try to be righteous, and it helps you look for those fights to stand for God and try to be righteous. And it's an exciting time. It's a wonderful time to be here. It's a wonderful time to be fighting this fight.
Thank you. Brad, I wanted to go back and touch on the SB, I think you said 1132, is that right?
1172.
1172. I want to touch back on that again. What specifically should we be doing? And what can we be doing to get involved?
Well, there's really not much, no, I'm just teasing.
Forget what I said. And on that,
There's nothing we can do. Thanks for coming.
No, don't move to Idaho. The first thing, a couple things. First is to take the information about it and disseminate it. You guys, how many of you ever forward things on to other people? I'm sure you do. Yeah, this group, you betcha. I mean, I know you do. So get a copy of the press release on our information about it. You can go to our website if you want to use our press release, you can. And feel free to use it. It's pacificjustice.org or pji.org. But that's one thing, is to pass it on. Number two is to encourage people with that information to contact their state legislator, state senator, their state assemblyman, and then finally the governor. One of the problems we have right now is there is not much being said about it. The legislators are saying, we're not hearing anything about this, and if we don't hear anything about this, it's going to go right on party line. Democrats are all going to be for it, Republicans are being against it, and then we lose because we're way outnumbered. We're just short of them having a super majority. So I think that's real important. Also, the pastors and churches need to be educated as to what they can do politically, and that they can't. Some of them are afraid to talk about this stuff, and that's a crying shame.
That's right.
It is. And so we at Pacific Justice have developed a little brochure. There's other material, a little booklet, but other groups have other stuff you can have too. What we have for you without charge, that's my theme, without charge, is a little booklet called Church and Politics.
Yeah.
It's a booklet. It's very clear, easy to understand, and it talks specifically the active role that churches can play when it comes to propositions, initiatives, and pending legislation. And so please feel free to go to our website and get a copy of that and use that and give that to your pastor. And you don't want to be dictating and pushy on them. They have a lot of pressure. Pastors have the most stressful job in America, what I understand. And you look at the turnover and all this stuff, because it's hard to be perfect because everyone expects to be perfect. So don't want to be hard on them, but in a loving way, talk to them and share with them from it and what they can do. Yes?
It was called Pastors and Politics, isn't it?
That's another.
We have Church and Politics.
It's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
white one. It's a white one.
Ours is a white one, but I think you just mentioned Dean Rose has one called Pastors and Politics. And he's a great guy, does great work. So I'm sure that's just as helpful, and I'm sure they agree with each other too. So either way, so I'd use that material. But that's, it's educating them. Right? A lot of them still feel that they can't say anything about any pending legislation. And that's ridiculous. Under the law, they can get involved in legislative issues and lobbying so long as they use a substantial portion of their total resources, money, time, space. And I've never seen a church, even with Prop 8, get anywhere close to the legal limit of substantial total resources, which is between 5 and 15%.
Brad, how many churches in the history of America have lost their 501c3?
None.
Out of one.
No.
It's a red herring.
It's a big red herring. In fact, hundreds of pastors across the country have a concerted effort, and I think that the folks over at ADF are helping on this one in a major way, have precipitated a lot of pastors to preach directly and deliberatively to violate the IRS code requirements, restrictions against talking about politicians, and explicitly do so, and then have sent it to the IRS.
They videotaped it every year.
They videotape it.
Yeah.
They send it to the IRS and just basically, and come and get us. And the IRS is not lifting a finger. And I think, and the reason
500 last year. 500.
and the reason the IRS is not lifting a finger and not challenging one of them, I believe, is because they know that if they do, they will lose. And if they lose, then the masses will feel inspired to do it. So they're right now still holding back, and I think that they will continue to hold back because they will lose, and then they will lose complete power of intimidation, which is what they've been exercising.
That old booklet over there that I take everywhere I go is entitled Mixing Church and State God's Way. It is a biblical treatise of Acts 16 that I wrote it, I preached it first. John Ashcroft was in our church the day I preached it, said, man, put that in print. So I did. But it is, I would encourage you, if I had one thing to give any of you, I would encourage you to give that book, read it, then give it to your pastor. Because it clearly lays out what the priority of a pastor is and what his responsibility is. So I would encourage you to pick that up. read it, and then give it to your pastor.
And do you think the pastors on the left are not doing that? You know they are.
Okay, questions. And the way we're going to try to answer these is as succinct as possible so we can get through as many of these as possible. Okay? So be specific with the answers, and if you want to jump in, jump in. Question 1. What is America's greatest threat in the near term, 1 to 3 years? Is it internal or external?
Very good question.
What's our greatest threat?
I would say that, in my opinion, like I said, the thing that keeps me up at night is a terrorist cell that's determined to conduct a terrorist operation on our soil with a massive amount of casualties, most likely in the form of a dirty bomb or a radiological bomb that would come from our southern border. That, in my opinion, is that not necessarily an existential threat, but would certainly make 9/11 look like a bad firecracker gone.
Yeah.
Frank, if I could ask about what's your views on EMPs, the viability?
It's electromagnetic pulse, which is usually generated, not usually, is generated by a nuclear explosion, or can be generated by certain systems that shall be nameless. And its primary usage is to basically block out and completely subdue electronic means, traffic, computers, all of the above. All of the above.
Yeah, but 1 second after.
Right. And so the EMP is kind of like, the 2000K or the, whatever it was called, the Y2K on demand, essentially. So yeah, it's got some real issues to it. And there are technologies out there that are available for people to be able to use it.
And can't that be done above the Earth's surface? Right.
That's precisely how it's done.
Right.
Next question. So it says, who do we vote for as a Christian today? I'm guessing it'd be impossible to say who is specific to region and ballot and what are we talking about, but maybe what kind of picture of a candidate as a Christian do we look for?
Everybody needs to get the family voter guide. Of course, that's in San Diego County. If you live in Oregon, wherever you live, you've got to look for a family voter guide. Because in San Diego County, it tells you who endorses the candidates. So if you want to see somebody endorsed by Planned Parenthood, you look for that candidate and you vote for them. But if you want to see somebody endorsed by a pro-life organization, that is who you look for. So that is where you find the candidates.
Very good point.
Well, it's done by the Christian Coalition of San Diego, but every area has its own group.
Yeah, real quick comment on that. Sometimes people ask me, they say, well, like for president, should I vote for this candidate? This candidate's not what I consider to be a Christian. It doesn't believe in my beliefs, biblical beliefs, and this one over here says he is, but his policies say he's not. And I go back to this. I sort of take ourselves out of where we are, go back to history. If we're in Nazi Germany and you have Adolf Hitler and you have someone who is opposed to the treatment of the Jews and the genocide, but the person's of a different faith and different reference point, but he's working to stop the genocide, who would you vote for? Would you stay at home and not vote for either one because there's not a good candidate? No, you'd be responsible. You'd vote for the one who has the right policies, the right values, in the right direction, and you would aggressively hold that person accountable once he's in office. And I think that is the second part to it, is to hold these people accountable. And that's one thing I like about the Tea Party movement, is because there's been a rejuvenation of that accountability that we haven't seen in a while. So.
And I think actions a lot of times trumps what they say. You guys don't know, kind of a history buff, on the back of a dress uniform for an SS officer from World War II, a German SS officer, it actually said, "God is with us," on the back of their belt. Do you think they believed in a righteous, almighty Jesus Christ? Absolutely not. But they used that as a tool to get the masses to say, they're okay. See, it says God. That's okay. It was on the back of an SS officer's belt. So it was inscribed in their dress uniform, just so you guys know.
Yeah, good point.
Aren't charter schools subject to SB 48? The bill says that public and alternative schools must make note of the bill.
Right. To answer that question, because my office looked at that, scrutinized it, and to be point blank on it, we do not believe that that language is clear enough and sufficient enough to bind charter schools. For them to take note of it is not what we would consider legally binding language. It would be nice to say, look, even it's kind of good public charter schools. There'll be some charter schools that will look at that and be intimidated, yes. But if we took them in court, would they win? Would they be forced to do it with that kind of language? I don't think they would, because it's too vague and descriptive in terms of what exactly they mean and what taking note would actually require them to do, other than just to take note. So that's our opinion.
All right. Another question, how do we challenge things like what happened in Poway with the teacher being told to take down historical American sayings like, "In God we trust"?
You know, I feel like the community of Poway did not come behind that teacher, because that teacher was a hero to all of us. And there were teachers that had horrible things about sayings of Mao or different horrible things that were terrible, and they were not challenged. It was only the man who had truly patriotic American themes that included the word God in it. So the citizens of that community have got to stand behind that teacher and flood that school board meeting with protests.
I would just add, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, Brent, I was just going to add that what happened the day after 9/11, we saw Democrats and Republicans standing on the Capitol steps singing, "God bless America."
God bless America.
Yet we can't have a Poway school teacher. So the hypocrisy is just so stark. And I think if we had some slick folks that could be able to fight fire with the liberal media and be able to say, you know what, if we could have somebody that could craft something that shows the stark hypocrisy that might get people like ourselves and others to be able to stand up and go to the Poway School District and say, you know what, enough is enough.
When did that happen?
A couple of years ago.
Last year?
Oh, no, it wasn't too, it has to be within the last 12 months. It has to
It's actually still being litigated.
It's a mute issue now. The day it happened is when the church and 2,000 other people should have been on the steps of that school demanding his reinstatement.
Absolutely.
They're going to continue to do this until you people in your community, like I did in Pearland, instead of saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I took.
They live in a glass house, guys. They really do live in a
so.
glass house, and we need to start breaking through. Because if we stand, I went to a recent university, and we had a socialism symposium, and during Q&A, we just tore the professors to pieces. So we got to stand, and they're not that strong.
You will never know till you get to heaven how many when that happened and the church didn't stand up,
Right.
how many other teachers took down everything that had God on it off their walls?
Yeah.
Why lose your job when the church isn't going to stand with you? That's the issue.
That's right. Hey, a quick point on that. I agree 100% with that. At Pacific Justice too, one of the things that is our hallmark as an organization is literally to make sure that no one is left on the side of the road and that everyone gets representation, so we don't just cherry pick. And the reason that's significant is just because what was said. All it takes is one, and it has ripples of fear that spreads out. But in order for us to find out about that, we need people like you to serve as watchmen to let us know. So if you see something that happens, contact us. Sometimes we miss it in the newspaper and whatnot. There was a school teacher in Los Angeles, LA Unified School District. We help a number of teachers on these issues. Forced to put a rainbow flag in the classroom and wear a red shirt in support of the Day of Silence. He was intimidated, forced out. We filed a lawsuit, a very nice lawsuit, and it had a very nice settlement. That school district has learned they will not do that again, and we are going to sue as much as we need to make that point. I think we have to have that vigilance, and we have to communicate that information. Also, to be proactive, frankly, school district Northern California, Loomis, they went ahead and they adopted it strategically to have the national motto put as a plaque in concrete at the foot of every school with a flagpole in concrete. So that's what they did. The language was perfect because it was the national motto. They didn't say put in God, but the national motto. It was very defensible. They've not been challenged. And then in North Carolina, We worked strategically on how to put in God We Trust, but also put the Ten Commandments, how to actually legally put that in the classroom by making it part of a broader display, America's heritage, the Magna Carta, Declaration of Independence, Constitution. I have the Ten Commandments first. And then also another organization, In God We Trust, having the national motto displayed publicly at city council meetings. We have a total partnership with that organization from the get-go. They send out our legal opinion letter to every city council that they send it to. And they are just growing and expanding one after another, cities, municipalities. So taking a proactive effort that's strategic and educated, I think we can really make a lot of progress.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
This one actually does say Brad, I think
I'm sorry.
Barbara would have some comments on this as well, as it's specific to Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is being implemented via a union between the ICLEI, now called Local Governments for Sustainability, and local, state, and federal partnerships. It's not legal for any level of government in the U.S. to implement policies from a foreign power. Is there a lawsuit possible? Maybe Article 10.
You want me to comment on that?
Yes.
Yeah. I would used to say that that people believe in the Trilateral Commission and the UN, all the conspiracy stuff. I just thought, well, these poor people are just not educated. They just don't realize that the Constitution is the highest law in the land. That is the highest law, and that's why we became a nation. The Founding Fathers made it very clear. These people have a lot of fear. They're not educated. And then the case out of Texas, the sodomy case out of Texas, came down, where the majority opinion from the Supreme Court cited selectively certain countries in Europe and the UN and international law to change our constitutional interpretation of the laws applied to sodomy laws. When that came out on radio, I said, I want to apologize to all of you out there who believe in the threat of the Trilateral Commission and the big conspiracy of the UN, because you're right and I was wrong. And the problem now is, since that sodomy case, the door is wide open for them to blatantly reference other law in deciding how to, from other countries internationally, to decide how to interpret our Constitution and to change it, which is what the liberal minority presently try to do.
And I would say on top of that, if you want an education, just Google the Lawrence versus Texas decision,
Right.
but go specifically to Scalia's minority report, where he predicted everything that's happening today would come out of that case regarding sexual advances by the homosexual community and other aberrant behavior. He wrote a classic prophetic word to the country that's come to pass.
Yeah,
And then-
that's the case.
And then what Dick Morris brought up too was the supremacy clause of Article 6, possibly too, where treaties with the United Nations, it's sometimes it's tough to beat those two. They seem to supersede the Constitution, treaties, and that's part of the scary part as well.
And keep in mind, coming from the mind of some of the members of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that if she was to craft a constitution, she was recommending how Egypt was to put together a constitution. She recommended that Egypt go and look at South Africa's constitution and stay away from looking at the United States Constitution as a model. And she is one of the 9 who gives the ultimate say on the Constitution in our country. Keep in mind, that's the kind of thing we're up against. This one specifically says, for Frank, your bio mentions knowledge of survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. If our country continues to be dismantled and destroyed by its current communist leaders, will you come back and teach us survival, evasion, resistance, and escape methods?
I'll just give you a little bit of insight on that. Your worst day evading beats your best day of captivity. So just keep that in mind in your survival situation, whatever that may be. When you think it's really the worst day you're possibly having, you're still free to crawl that next step or to hide under that next piece of wood. But the day you get captured, all the fun is over with.
Yes.
Save that last one.
I want to say, everybody here, have you seen the Newsweek cover that's out this week?
Yes.
Every one of you should make a, don't buy it.
Well, has anybody not seen it? Do they not? Because I want to make sure everybody knows. It has a picture of President Obama with a halo that's a rainbow that says our first gay president.
I would make a copy of that and show it to every friend you have that's struggling with who to vote for president. And ask them if if that reflects biblical truth. Now, it's not a world of lost people, but people who know Christ should look at that, and it should settle all the discussions about who they vote for president.
Well, on that note, this is the perfect segue to this question. 2008, President Obama carried the state of Florida by 23,000 votes. At the time in Florida, there were over 409,000 unregistered Christian conservative voters. What is the action plan to get everyone registered in the state of California? Now, Dr. Scarborough, you may not be able to speak to our lovely state, but I want to find out what would be an action plan, and more importantly, this part of the question: what can one person do when talking to their pastor? They want talking points to get the pastor fired up about saving our constitutional republic. What can we do?
Jim Garlow was at the Religious Freedom Rally, remember, that we had in front of the county administration building. You all know that his wife Carol is very ill, extremely ill. It's bad. But anyway, what Jim said that day was, we learned that when your oncologist gives you horrible news, you have to find a new oncologist. And he went on, I can't quote him exactly, but Pastor Garlow said, when you are in a church and they are not talking about these things, you have to find a new pastor or a new church.
Right.
That's what you must do.
He
And we
also-
did.
He
We left our
also,
church.
he also, Pastor Garlow also said that the seniors need to be prepared to go to jail.
Oh, yeah.
I think another point on this is to have Christian news talk, and I have a little program on K-Wave on Saturdays, 10:30 a.m. FYI. But I think that Salem and other Christian networks would have Christian news talk. We all need to have this exhortation as a part of the dialogue, and the opportunities to register, why we should register, why they should get involved, and we can't wait till the day before the election to do it, and specifically the general election. So I think there'll be a lot on the line. I think that's another element. And get on the phone call and say, why aren't you having people, talk to and then you hear people with these shows, and they have call in, and just make that an issue, about voter registration and should, can churches vote, and what do you think of that,
I ran my local polling center for 10 years, and I have to tell you, without identifying any political positions, there were young people from, I'm going to say the Democratic Party or whatever party it was, that were bringing in carloads of people who couldn't get to the polls by themselves or wouldn't walk. They would go pick them up. We had to allow them to look at the voter registration, see who had not been to the poll to vote, get the address, and go get that person and bring them to the poll. Now, nobody was doing that from the conservative side or the Republican side, but a lot of people were going out there making see.
And you also don't know if they really brought those people. They brought people.
Yeah, they brought people.
They brought people.
And we weren't allowed to ask for identification.
Of course.
Another example of that was when my mother-in-law went for her citizenship, and when she walked out of that door after raising her hand, the first people that met her right there were members of the Democratic Party,
Yeah.
ready to hand out free stuff, and that's what they said. We're going to give you free stuff to my mother-in-law. Thank goodness my wife was there and
Thank
nipped
you.
that in the bud.
Dr. Scarborough, that's a good update. Thank you.
I have a 6 a.m. flight home tomorrow. My mother's turning 80 years old tomorrow and have a surprise party for us. I can't
Please note his books, he does have his books over there for sale, so stop by there before we go. Okay, well, Frank, you mentioned the Muslim training camps in this country. That was some discussion. What is being done with these Muslim training camps after they are discovered?
Well, I can't speak to any specific issues. I'm not in law enforcement. I don't know specifically. I'm going to have to research it myself. I do know that there was the one camp that was found up there. I think the thing that we need to be concerned about, though, is that the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE have made it very, very clear, and by Islamic by Islamic law and by Islamic theology, it is not uncommon for the Islamic agenda to use the laws and the structure of the nation in which to advance their Sharia law. That's a fact. That's not my opinion. That's the way it's done. And often in history, in Islamic victories on the battlefield, the first thing that they do is erect a mosque or a shrine to reinforce that. So I would simply say that it would not surprise me that there are young men training vigorously here in our country. I know of the one incident, and perhaps what I might do is do some research on that and put it out on my blog, which I'll share that address in a little bit. Yes,
You
ma'am.
are,
I read there are 23 of those camps in the U.S.
What?
Well,
Yes, it was in the news, WND.
I'm not disputing it. I just don't know, for my personal opinion. It doesn't surprise me. And you come to find out the political correctness within the San Diego, or not San Diego, but in the county sheriff's offices and other state law enforcement. They're very hesitant to tip that apple cart over, and I think we need to stand up to that.
And I know you have more questions, but if you don't know about the Rock Church and our local community, we have a cap on how long we're allowed to be here. So we have to wrap it up, because if we are here 1 second longer, then all the people who don't like us in our community then go to city council and we get in trouble. So we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a night. Lance, one more announcement, and then we're all done. But first, please, everybody, just a round of applause for everybody on our panel. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for